Hello, welcome. My name is Alon Schwartzman, and I will be presenting today The Wonder of Language and How It Shapes Our World, a case study of the Pirahã language and culture and its significance for teaching English as a second language. So you can see here uh, this photo. This is an actual photo of the Pirahã tribe. And we'll get into a little bit about their culture and then about their language and how the two intertwine. And then finally, what the ramifications for those intertwinings are for uh, teaching English or even any other language as a second, tertiary, and so forth language. Specifically with a mind for how we would bring this pedagogy to students learning English as a second language within Israel. Okay, so soak in this first picture. Actually, let me put it on to uh, this mode here. Excellent. Okay, so let's move on. The people. Here you can see a few pictures that give a sense of where we find ourselves now. If you look here, the Pirahã tribe are located in this part of Brazil in the Amazon rainforest. And you can see a fellow here riding in his canoe on one of the tributaries. And down below, you see a general picture of the Amazon River. I can verify that that is actually it. I've been there before. Looks very similar to that. Okay, so the Pirahã are an indigenous people that live in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, as I said. It's a culture that, according to their own reportage to researchers, that recognizes only events and objects that appear within the bounds of that experience, which is both immediate and personal, and therefore has no history other than direct contemporary transpirings within a single generation. So if you can imagine, this is a scenario where basically it's very dissimilar to how we operate in the modern world, or that is to say, within highly developed technological cultures. Well, I hesitate to say that because, just as a quick disclaimer, I mean, of course, they are also highly developed, but in a different direction. If you put one of us to live with their tribe, on the most deepest and personal of levels, I'm sure we would have a very difficult time, and it would become mightily apparent to us just how specialized they were within their own environment. So that's something that we have to try to remember, because I do think that it can sometimes be confusing that people think that they are modern and the people they are studying are primitive, and that's the wrong idea. It's actually there really is no such thing as a primitive people. That's the main lesson. All right, back. Let's. I'll try not to digress. So this is a very interesting culture, though, because, like I said, according to what they say to researchers, anyway, we don't know for sure if that's in fact what they truly believe in all respects, but this is what they self-report. And this is sometimes an issue in anthropology because people are not always completely honest, or they're not giving a full account. Imagine if I asked you about your own life or about the practice of Judaism within Israel. Everybody has a slightly different answer, and you can imagine people getting quite contentious about, oh, no, that's not right. No, no, it's actually like this. So, it's gives you a general idea, but you know, be aware that this is just self-reportage from some individuals. But what we know is that, in essence, more or less, they pretty much believe in that which is immediate and personal, and that things that have happened within a single generation. So within Judaism, for example, we live an everyday existence which is completely full of awareness of the ancient past, that on a daily basis, right now, we routinely imagine, talk about, reference Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham Avinu, Dvorah. There's no end. And we do it in prayers, we do it in daily speech. Our religiosity, our mythology, our belief, our emunah is inseparable from history, from our sense of toldotenu, of our history. And for the Pirahã people, it's not like that at all. They may have traces of a kind of collective memory, which is probably common to all human beings in one way or another, but they certainly do not treat history or their own, like their toldotehem. They don't treat that in the same way that we do. They are a group that holds as one of its highest social values the practice of not telling others what to do. That is a taboo on coercion of others. It's a tribe that operates without official leaders and with no known social hierarchy. The people continued. There are people that has a very simple kinship paradigm. So pihi is any kind of child. Hoari is a son. Kai is a daughter. Haigi is a sibling. And bai is an elder, parent, grandparent, etc. Please excuse my pronunciation. I am not an expert in how to pronounce Pirahã, but the X that you see is actually a glottal stop, similar to an aleph in Hebrew. So that's why I pronounced that way. I tried to approximate the higher or rising pitch that is indicated by the the accent mark on the eyes. Anyway, so the idea, though, is that these are the family relations that are tracked by the Pirahã tribe, and it doesn't go much beyond that. Those are the main kinship terms. Now, in English and in Hebrew, we have quite a number of kinship terms. We have different words for grandma and grandpa, grandmother, grandfather, mother, father, sister, brother. We even now have a word for siblings, ahaim, with an aleph in the middle. And that can mean that's not commonly used, but we have it. And there are many other kinship terms that we enjoy to be able to outline our family relations. And then there are other languages in the world that are even more, have even more extreme systems of kinship terms. Even if you compare the Hebrew biblical system of kinship terminology, it was probably a fair amount more developed than it is today. But we still have peoples today that have very sort of not ornate, but very developed kinship system paradigms. So all kinds of different words for the slightest differences in family relation. But even in Hebrew and English, which is somewhere in the middle of in terms of complexity of family relation paradigms, kinship paradigms, compared to the Pirahã, you can see it's scarcely more than, what is that, 5 different words. And it means that if you were talking about your grandmother or your grandfather, your mother, your father, it's all the same word. And they don't track anything beyond a sibling, basically. So not even a cousin or an uncle. And an uncle probably, I would imagine, would also be called a bai. Uh, so it's really quite fascinating. And I want to stress the reason I'm telling you about this is because it does connect with their language. And then once we understand their language, together with this anthropological characterization, we'll see how this connects to teaching English as a second language. So they're a tribal unit that builds simple huts that hold no more than a few basic cooking implements and machetes. They manufacture only scrapers, arrows, palm leaf bags, and arrows. They sleep in bursts of only a quarter of an hour to 2 hours throughout the day and night. That's not so uncommon among tribes that are similar to the Pirahã, so that's not so surprising. And it's likely that many humans in their earlier histories prior to modern civilization also had sleeping patterns that are very distinct from what we observe today. An ethnic group that does not hold chastity as a normative value. So, of course, in Judaism and many other religions and cultures today, chastity is considered to be a highly important normative value. And it's really held to very well religiously. Among the Pirahã, and this is true of a number of tribes uh, that live in rainforests and so forth, that chastity is, there are rules. It's not that there are no rules, but they simply do not, they're not along the lines of the normative values that we tend to have in terms of, we'll say, the propriety of intimacy. Okay. So, a few more notes and illustrative anecdotes. Illustrative anecdotes. The Pirahã were taught by a master carpenter to build the canoes they use every day, which they received from other local peoples. But upon needing a new canoe, said, Pirahã do not make canoes. Very interesting comment, because this is not merely that they say we don't know how to make canoes. It's not that they said we don't want to make canoes. This has nothing to do with will. This is just a bare fact from their point of view. They say Pirahã do not make canoes, as if this is a cosmic law, as if this is a law come down from the universe, like a commandment. It's very incredible because it has to be read in that light. They're not simply saying, oh no, we don't do that in this sort of offhanded way. They mean it as a fact that within their worldview, there is no scenario in which a Pirahã would make a canoe because it is not part of their reality. It just that it's an unthinkable act for a Pirahã to make a canoe because Pirahã do not make canoes. It would break a law of nature. So you can see already that there is a structure to reality in terms of how they perceive reality through their own anthropological lens. Not anthropological for them, but for us it is. as we view it from the outside as researchers. So very, very interesting. Very different from how we would talk about our own limitations or abilities. Because even if, say, in the context of Judaism, we were to say, well, something, this particular act is forbidden, asul, or this particular act is mutar, it's allowed. It doesn't, you know, we very likely, if we're pious people, we will, we're very likely to follow these injunctions. But on the other hand, we also know, maybe deep down or on the surface, that we have every possibility of breaking or not agreeing to the terms of these injunctions, even if I am told by person or by book that, Alone, you have to do this. I don't have to do it. I can just simply not do it. And part of that has to do with us living in a very pluralistic society where we're very ultra aware of other peoples, other systems. There's an injection of relativism that we have received that gives us at least the option, even if we don't decide to take it or to act upon it. But for the Pirahã, there is no existence of another option. There is simply what is, and that is that the Pirahã do not make canoes. So it's hard for us to imagine this because we have something like ultimate choice. Even if we may decide to be religious mitzvah keeping Jews, but that's just it. It's a decision, and maybe we would like to believe it's not a decision, that we're carrying on a tradition, which we are, but nonetheless, because we know that there are other paths, and then we choose to do this one, say, it's a decision. It's something that we decide to do in lieu of doing other things. And for the Pira'ah, it doesn't mean that there's no individual who's never imagined, oh, wait, maybe I could leave the tribe and go to the city. But traditionally speaking, things are very defined in terms of what a Pira'ah can be. And it comes back again to being, you know, just dealing with what's right in front of you at this time, what in the present, not in the past, not in the future, what is happening in the present right before me without, getting too much into abstractions. The Pira'ah do not make canoes. Drawing is outside of the Pira'ah's realm of traditional knowledge, and when asked to draw trees, people, or animals, they produce simple lines. So essentially, they're just not used to drawing. It's not something that they do. Similarly, the Pira'ah do not make canoes. The Pira'ah also do not generally draw. So this was a brand new exercise for them, and you could say that it may just be that they're not used to it and that they're not really trained how to do it. I mean, you can imagine that even a small child within our culture, it takes time to learn how to make a semblance of something else with drawings of a pencil or a pen or a crayon. You don't just do it. You have to learn how to do it. You graduate from doing little simple squiggles to starting to draw a semblance of a tree, a person, an animal. But it does take experience, and it does take development of the skill over time. And it also has a relation to childhood development, both on a linguistic level and on a behavioral level. So it's just something that they have to go through in order to start to be able to make a semblance of trees, people, animals, etc. But as it stands now, when they try, they only produce simple lines or squiggles. The Pirahã do not have a concept of a great deity. When they were presented with the idea of the Christian God as son, they quickly grew disinterested when they learned that the researchers had never actually seen the spirit person in question. So that tells us exactly what I've been trying to get at, that if it can't be seen right now in front of you, that there's no way to prove or demonstrate its immediacy, then it's as if it doesn't exist. They grew disinterested when they realized the researchers had never actually seen this spirit person that they're trying to convince them of the existence of. Very interesting. For us, such a thing is unthinkable because ultimately we're told about things all the time. We read about things that we've never seen, never heard, never tasted, never experienced. But for a great plethora of different reasons, we are convinced to believe the story, and it becomes part of our identity, it becomes part of our belief system, it becomes part of our daily consciousness. But for the Pirahã, it's just simply disallowed. It is not something that they do. It will only be adopted if it is immediately perceivable by the senses. Anytime that a statement is made, the Pirahã require direct experience-based evidence. Now, this is not only true on a cultural level, but is also mirrored in the structure of the language itself, which we'll see in a moment. And of course, this is, they're not the only people to have a language which marks via various particles and other means direct experience and other forms of, we'll say, for lack of a better term, moods. There are a number of languages, generally from hunter-gatherers, quote less civilized unquote groups, tend to have linguistic systems that include these kinds of particles that we simply lack in languages like English and Hebrew and probably most modernized languages. You can still say these things, but you have to do it through circumlocution. It's not by just a simple particle that gives you all that information in one syllable, say. But I'll get to that in a moment, even if I may not be so clear what I'm talking about, but you'll see in just a moment. The Pirahã believe in spirits. These spirits might be flora, fauna, and people in their jungle environment. However, these spirits take the form of standard, tangible objects only that can be detected by the five senses. So this is a very important caveat that I say that Pirahã believe in spirits. This seems to contradict kind of what I've been saying before, that they believe only in what they can see in front of them, direct experience within a single generation. But the caveat is that while they believe in spirits, the spirits, in terms of their identity, are very much in accordance with what I've been describing. So there's no actual oxymoron here, though it may seem so, because their, quote, spirits, unquote, are actually very real, immediate objects from their environment. So, like I said, the spirits take the form of standard tangible objects only, meaning that, say, a jungle leopard or a tree or a river that is right there before them, this can be a spirit, but a sort of invisible floating wraith going woo in the background. This is not something that's possible within the system of the Pirahã. Okay, the language. Now, we've all been waiting for this part. Let's get into why all of this boring anthropological information has been presented. It's actually really, really important that I discuss that because we'll now see along the lines of Sapir-Whorf and linguistic relativism why the sort of anthropological background of the Pirahã and other peoples is really important when considering the structure of their languages. And likely it's that the culture influences the language and vice versa, that the language also influences the culture. And it may even be stronger than influences. It may even be something along the lines of determines. And it's a feedback loop between uh, the sort of influence slash determining of language on culture and culture on language. And it goes sort of around and around in a feedback loop, I believe, because it's sometimes asked, is it that culture determines the language or that language determines the culture? Is it one or the other? And more broadly, does language determine worldview, perception, and thought? Not merely culture, but perception and thought. So when I use the word culture, I'm also referring to Weltanschauung and perception and worldview. So it's often been asked, is it, which one is it? Is it that language determines thought, perception, culture, or vice versa? And I posit that it's actually both in a feedback loop. Anyway, let's get back on track here. I apologize for all these digressions, but I feel that they're important to the final conclusion of uh, this report. Report is not quite the word I'm looking for here. What is the word I'm looking for here? Presentation. There we go. See, I have various languages running through my head, and I'm trying to stop the right word in its tracks in the proper language in which I'm giving the presentation at the moment. So please bear with me, and thank you for your patience. So the Pirahã language, it's claimed by some researchers to have no relative clauses or grammatical recursion. If the latter is indeed true, then it could challenge the theory that recursion occurs in all human languages, which is a major claim within linguistics. Now, I'll get to what grammatical recursion is in a moment. Very, very important. So don't get too scared about, oh God, I can't possibly deal with this right now. It's actually not so difficult, but I'll get to it in a second. Believed to be among the languages with the least number of phonemes, with between 9 to 12 only, sometimes as it's been estimated as being as low as 8 different phonemes, depending on whether a woman is speaking. Because when women speak, they are more phonemically conservative than men. Uh, and it may sound strange, like, why would there be a difference in the way that women and men speak? Well, that happens even in our own language in Hebrew. Uh, when a when a male says something, he says ani ohev. But when a woman is speaking, she says ani ohevit. There's some variation, obviously, in various parts of the society that people sort of mix and match depending on identity. But ultimately, it's along those lines. And so we can see that it's not so strange that men and women would speak differently. In Hebrew, it's really just a difference of morphology and conjugation, where we see these differences in the gender or sex of the speaker. But in Pirahã, it's actually more along the lines of the phonemes that are actually produced. And also, if tones are considered, tones are where if I take a letter like A, if I say ah, you can have various tones that you can say ah, 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 ah. You can hear that I say the same vowel but with different tones. In many languages, like Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, for example, having the exact same phonemes but a different tone can completely change the meaning of the word. And you can even have whole sentences that it's not common, but theoretically, you can make whole meaningful sentences that are basically the same word, but just said with different tones. So they're like famous, I can't even remember, but there's one. It's like sure, 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 sure. I'm not doing it properly at all, but it gives you an idea. It's a story about a tiger, etc. So um, it shows you how even having the same sound but with different tones absolutely changes the meaning in some languages. Whereas in English, for example, tone does change meaning, but it's actually not tone, it's intonation. So the way that I say a phrase, if I say, is this happening? No, I'm sorry, that's not a good example. This is happening as versus this is happening. This is happening. They all kind of have different meanings. That's intonation. But in Pirahã, tones can actually change the meaning of an individual word in a very discrete way. That's Discrete, not Discreet. Okay, so Pirahã's vowel inventory consists of A, I, and O. Its consonant inventory consists of P, T, K, a glottal stop, which is basically an aleph in Hebrew, B or M, G or N, and S and H. The total inventory consists of between 2 and 3 tones, which have phonemic value, meaning that the tones are as if they're phonemes unto themselves. And its allophonic variation is considerable, including 2 sounds that appear to be limited to Pirahã. I can't even begin to try to pronounce these. I have a sense of how they sound, but it's very, very difficult. The last one, you can see it looks like a T and a B. It sounds sort of like blowing a raspberry, so something like that. But it's limited. They don't do it very often, and they certainly have stopped doing it in front of foreigners or outsiders because they see how that's viewed um, by outsiders. Because for us, for example, it would probably seem like a rude, uh, childlike, childish gesture, but it actually carries meaning within their language. Allophonic, it it's I won't get into the full meaning of that, but it has to do with the way that uh, phonemic quality can change depending on the letters that are around the letter in question. So in Hebrew, we also have allophonic changes in proper speech. So, in everyday Hebrew, people might often be heard to say ve bapalk, but more properly, of course, it's uva palk. So that you can see already there's an aleph. It's the same letters essentially, but they change their quality. Bet goes to vet, and ve goes to u. So those are something like allophonic variations, characterized by an intricate number. An intricate system of vowel lengths, stresses, and tones. So they may have a small phonemic inventory, but the vowels have different lengths, the stresses are complicated, and of course the tones that we discussed. So even though the actual individual phoneme number is quite small, the ways they have of actually producing them is pretty ornate. So it's not really so limited as it seems. Now, the language can also be whistled, hummed, or sung while serving as a vehicle of complete everyday communication. That is, conversations do not need to be spoken, they may be whistled, hummed, or sung as well. And this is a way even that Pirahã mothers sort of explain things to their children. They will hum or sing or whistle information to their children. And it's not merely suggestions that it sort of sounds like something linguistic. They are actually literally speaking the way that I am right now by just using notes that correspond to their phonemic and tonal system. It's something unimaginable within Hebrew or English. There's just nothing like that. Uh, though they're not the only ones who have a system like this. This does exist in some other languages as well, but I won't get into that now. I could talk about this for hours. One the Pirahã language is one with complex verb structure. This is very complex. The verb stem allows for up to 15 agglutinative slots where special morphemes notate if the subject or object is nearby or distant to the speaker, if something is desired, if a reported event was actually witnessed firsthand or was only heard about from another person, if the speaker is certain that the event actually happened or not, and many other aspectual markers. Ah, yes, aspect, that was the word I meant before rather than mood. However, despite this complexity and aspectuality, Pirahã does not have any markers for gender, number, person, or tense. So very incredible. Hebrew, we have gender, we have number, we have person, we have tense. English mostly lacks gender, although we do have some remaining markers like she, him, and that sort of thing, but it's very limited at this point. English, we have number, that is to say, like singular and plural and so forth. Hebrew, we have singular, plural, and technically dual. So if I say ish, that's singular, anashim is plural, and technically, even though it would sound strange to us now, I could say anshaim, and that would mean two people. We could argue about the structure of that word. Maybe a better example is, well, like, you can take, we have everyday words like einaim, eyes. That's already in a dual form because we have two eyes. But we also, at this point, use it to mean any number of eyes as well. So if I say that there are 40 eyes in a room, I don't say arba'im ainim or something like that. Or a it's very complicated because it's feminine, but we'll say ainim. I say ainaim still, but that's still the dual marker. So something more proper, it would be something like sefil. So sefil is book, sfarim is the plural, And it would be something like Sfaraim would mean 2 books. So that's number. And then person, it's basically pronouns, I, you, he, she, etc. Uh, and then but marked grammatically, and tense. And of course that's past, present, future, and other sort of subforms within those categories. Okay, and this Pirahã language, it lacks any ordinal or cardinal numbers. That means the language lacks terms for numbers and can only express hoi and hoi, which are minimal pairs distinguished only by tone. So you can see they look completely the same, pretty much, except for differences in accent, or so not accent, excuse me, in tone. As you can see, the accent over the O in the first word and the I in the second word. So that means they are minimal pairs. So they look basically the same, they are essentially the same, and the only difference is the tone. The first one means a small amount, and the second one means a large amount. The Pirahã are believed to have a cultural aversion to counting, as they have a notion that their way of life is perfect and does not require modification by outside influences. So this is kind of a big point of contention within the research, because they've actually been given classes by researchers to try to get them to learn how to count to 10. And either because of this cultural aversion or for other reasons, linguistic or otherwise, they have scarcely gotten beyond counting to 2 successfully. It's just something that is not important to them, that they don't take seriously. They don't really have a need for it. So I think people might think, oh, well, this means that they're not capable. It's not that. I think it's probably a cultural aversion, but it's also possible that learning to count or to understand math in a kind of arithmetic, really, in a sort of intuitive way. It may be something that's similar to language itself, that if you are not exposed to language from an early age, you will become what's called a feral child, like Genie. And if you then it is then attempted after you're quote saved unquote, you're not going to be able to learn language so well. You'll be able to learn to a certain degree how to speak, but you will never master syntax. You will never master vocabulary. You will never be able to fully express yourself as you would had you grown up with language through the most important years of your childhood, from birth to age 5, 6, about. If you miss that window, you're out of luck. I'm afraid. So you can still learn, but it's not. I'm talking about learning language at all. I'm not talking about learning a second language. If you have a first language and you're learning a second language, that's already a different phenomenon. I'm talking about a scenario in which you are not exposed to language at all in the critical period. So similarly, it may be said that the Pirahã are not really exposed to discrete counting or arithmetic in early childhood. So that may actually be similar to what happens if you're not exposed to language during the critical period. That's just my own, I'm speculating, but I believe that's possible. So they also are believed to have no special color words other than light and dark. However, colors may be indicated by saying that an object has the same color as some other known object. Thus, that fruit is red might be rendered as that fruit has the same look as blood. It is suspected by some linguists to have borrowed all of its pronouns from local languages and has been theorized by some researchers to have originally lacked any pronouns at all. No I, no you, no he, she, it, they. But this claim is highly contested by other experts in the field. It is possible, though. If you can imagine a language being spoken without pronouns, it's almost impossible to imagine as a speaker of English and Hebrew. It's hard to say. I mean, I also speak Mandarin Chinese to a certain degree, having lived there in China, and it's a pro-drop language, which means that you frequently do not use a pronoun in everyday utterances. So you may be saying something like "I love you," but in the shortest form, you don't even need to say I or you. You just say love, and it's already understood from context that you're saying that you love the other person. Languages like French, no option. You have to say all pronouns involved. English, pretty much you have to say all pronouns involved. Maybe in some colloquial variations, you can say not interested. In that case, that shows you don't need to use any. You don't have to say I am not interested in that. You just say not interested. So there are certain utterances where you can drop pronouns, but it's not at all like in Chinese, for example, or Japanese, where you can completely drop pronouns. Uh, Hebrew is sort of a semi pro drop language, so in some cases you do have to use pronouns, but there are many cases in Hebrew where you're able to drop pronouns as well. So it's somewhere in the middle between, say, French and Chinese or Japanese. So that gives you an idea what a language without pronouns would sound like. It's thought by some researchers not to allow constructions like the big, happy, friendly brown dog. Such a phrase would have to be rendered as the dog is brown, it is friendly, it is happy, it is big. So this is what I was talking about before with regard to recursion. So it's believed by some researchers that Pirahã does not allow grammatical recursion. So phrases like the big, happy, friendly brown dog is illicit. It's not possible. It has to be separated into completely, uh, completely, what's the word? Individualized sentences, utterances that are distinct from one another. The dog is brown. It is friendly. It is happy. It is big. Likewise, embedded in recursive content such as the cat's owner's hut is also an illegal structure in the language. In English, I can get away with saying that, the cat's owner's hut. And you can also do it in Hebrew, but you would use shel to do it. So you would say, the cat's owners, you would say um, the cat's owners. So you would say haba'al shel hahatul. So you'd have to say something like the habikta shel haba'al shel hatul in colloquial Hebrew, and then of course in proper Hebrew you could even go, take it to uh, biktato shel ba'alo shel hatul, something like that. So those are possible in English and Hebrew, but not possible in Pira'ã. So it would have to be rendered quasi-paratactically as there is a cat, it has an owner, that is his hut. This suggests that sentences in Pira'ã have a limit on length and that there is a finite number of possible phrases and sentences on any given set of vocabulary items. Furthermore, sentences like Bob says that Samantha thinks that Toby has left the camp are also not allowed. They would have to be deconstructed into several simpler sentences to be expressed. Okay, further notes, and we're almost done with the language part. Hooray. Everett, one of the main researchers into the Pirahã language, controversially posits that it is in fact true that the language actually lacks recursion, as we just discussed. If it does, this may challenge the foundations of the famous or infamous Chomskyan linguistics, which holds recursion as a basic principle. Chomsky and others fiercely contest this claim, of course, saying that even if Pirahã lacks recursion, this would not falsify their theory of language. You know, even linguists get into these kinds of arguments. It seems a little bit funny, but it is actually a very serious issue. The word Pirahã is an exonym, meaning that this is not what the Pirahã call themselves, this is what outsiders call them. The Pirahã actually call themselves by the endonym, that is, their own name for themselves is, let's see if I can do this, Hiaiti, no, sorry, that's not right, Hiaiti. That's I'm totally massacring it, but that's the idea. It means the straight ones. No, massacre is not right. Butcher, I'm butchering it. The straight ones. The term for speakers of other languages are referred to as crooked head. So they see themselves as the straight ones, and then others are crooked head. So it gives you a sense. You know, this is very common, of course, in world cultures that you view your own culture as superior. The Pirahã whistle rather than speak their language during hunting expeditions into the rainforest, which we previously discussed. I didn't say that they used it in hunting expeditions, but that is another instance where they would use whistling to express their language rather than speaking it outright. And if you look below, you can see the actual phonemic inventory of the language. I mean, look how small or terse this system is compared to English or Hebrew or Arabic. We have so many different possible sounds compared to this very small number here. Very, very fascinating. But as you can see, if you look below, technically there's a lot of variation. So there's a B, but there are several different possible ways that might change allophonically of how that B would actually be realized. And same for G, S, and T. So, and that together with the tones and other aspects would actually make it a uh, pretty complicated a language. Okay, so what is the meaning of all this? Well, according to Daniel Everett, this main researcher, there are interrelated pairs of perceptual correlations between the Pirahã language and the Pirahã culture. For example, the Pirahã language has very few kinship terms, and the Pirahã's actual concept of kinship reflects this terminological paucity. So, again, we come back to that question: is it that perception in culture is determined by language, or vice versa, or is it both in a feedback loop? The apparent unified nature of the Pirahã language and culture, where directness, simplicity, and absolute matter of factness are key characterizations, suggest that the Pirahã have a cultural propensity for the deliberate eschewing or rejection of what they consider to be extraneous excess, both in language and in culture. These points lead us into the territory of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, linguistic relativity, as we talked about before. Now that we have learned some important characteristics of both the Pirahã language and the Pirahã people, we can immediately see that their anthropological profile, rejecting the unseen world and what is not immediately perceivable, requiring for requiring second-party experiential evidence on any claim, both marking this linguistically and according it mandatory cultural practice, having a religion limited to almost entirely present tangible things, an extremely concise kinship system, favoring a leaderist tribal organization without hierarchy, and treating coitus without great taboo, in fact, mirrors the way that their language works, which largely encodes linguistically the very things that they practice and believe as a culture. I will put a small disclaimer. I said religion. You could argue that they don't have a religion really. So I use the term religion loosely. It depends on how you define a religion. Okay. Could this mean that their language helps determine their culture, anthropological profile, their thought, their perception, or perhaps vice versa? Perhaps both? Perhaps both spheres are locked in a perpetual feedback loop, such that the language reinforces the culture, the thought, the perception, and the culture the thought, the perception reinforces the language, with a major impact on how the world is perceived or at least treated by the Pirahã. What can we take from all of this as educators? You can see a few important educators just to illustrate the point. Below is Tomlinson, and above on the top left hand side, you can see the famous Jaime Escalante, a very important teacher. And here on the other side, you can see what appears to be a rabbi teaching his son or a talmid. And below, you have a sort of caricature of a gold miner carting away his gold in a wheelbarrow, and that I put there to illustrate what can we take from all this. We can learn from the extreme case of Pirahã just how distinct cultures and languages other than our own can be. We are English teachers teaching Hebrew speakers, but many are not merely Hebrew speakers. There may be Amharic speakers, Tigrinya speakers, Tigre speakers, Arabic speakers, Russian speakers, Moldovans or Romanian speakers, rather, or Moldovan if you want to get into that. But it's, the point is that there are people, there are students that you absolutely will have who may not merely be speaking Hebrew as a first language, but may have other language backgrounds as well. And all of these competing structures within the languages they know can, in fact, change their learning profile. It can change their readiness to learn certain structures in English. It absolutely is affected by the structure of your first language or languages. So this is why I think this first sentence is really important, that we can learn from the Pirahã just how distinct cultures slash languages can be from our own. When we teach English, especially as native speakers, you don't even think twice about most of the things you say. But we have to start doing that. We can see that while it is a popular positive trope, the idea that we are all one, everybody is basically the same, we're all human at the end of the day, these generalizations do not account for what an astounding degree, or to what astounding degree peoples and languages differ in total structure. Often when everything is tallied up, the differences are shocking and unexpected. We often think, oh, everybody's one, we're all the same. And in a certain sense, that's true, perhaps. But it kind of steamrolls over just how different we can be as well. So This means that we should encounter other cultures and languages on their own terms. Very, very important. Let me say that again. This means that we should encounter other cultures and languages on their own terms. I'm suggesting, of course, we do this as English teachers teaching English as a second language in Israel and beyond. We should realize that for native Hebrew speakers of other languages, learning English as a second, third, fourth, or fifth language in Israel, uh, uh, the challenges on the ground for them are far more subtle than we might imagine, even if we are fluent in Hebrew ourselves. So this is really important to sort of be aware of. Our students are not merely learning a new language, they are in fact learning a new way of seeing reality, of arranging thoughts, of ordering priorities, and of naming the very elements of one's very perception through speech and expression. Like Adam in the Garden of Eden. In this sense, learners of language, both of first and second languages, are all Adams, naming the pieces of their world. Even though there exist many shared and comparable elements between Hebrew and English, just as between any two languages, the differences are always far greater than we casually estimate. Language may not determine perception and thought entirely, but likely does determine culture and anthropological profile, which we can then turn it itself, or sorry, which can then in turn itself in a sort of feedback loop go back and then redetermine the language via culture and anthropological profile. This, of course, has far reaching consequences in how wars play out, how international relations proceed, and indeed how almost any human or human linked event transpires. So it is actually very important to have a sense of how language can affect culture and vice versa. It's not just a theoretical, philosophical, boring sort of pilpul. This is a very this has very far-reaching consequences and is a very practical consideration at the end of the day. Even though it doesn't sound practical at all, it is very practical. We would be wise to feel the short-sightedness of seeing our English students through our own eyes as English teachers. Instead, let us see through the eyes of our students, who themselves are atoms. Not atoms, but Adams. Adam. They are atoms literally building a new world for themselves through learning a new language. They are naming their world. This lesson is equally true, and perhaps especially so, for teaching and interacting with special needs children and differently abled adults. Language, even on the most basic of levels, can open an entirely new and unforeseen universe to a person for whom there were previously no or few horizons. Famous cases include those of Helen Keller, Jeannie, and many others. Helen Keller was blind and deaf, and her incredible teacher, Anne Sullivan, by using a tactile sign language where she actually signed into her palm, for example, this this opened Helen Keller's world. She had very limited sense of senses or sense data because she wasn't born uh, deaf and blind, but at a very, very early age, she became so. But Anne Sullivan essentially opened the world completely, opened the world of language, and then Helen Keller became a writer. It's hard to imagine. That's incredible. Jeannie, she was a so called feral child. I mentioned her before. She was raised, or not raised, um, under horrendous conditions. I believe in Los Angeles in the 70s, maybe. It's you don't want to hear this. If you're interested, you should look it up. It is not for the faint of heart, this story, but it's just one of many The idea is that she was horrendously neglected as a child, missing the critical period from birth to 5, 6, where she was basically alone and strapped down, and it's horrible. I hate to even discuss it, but she was essentially saved um, when she was older, and she was able to learn language to a degree. She could express herself basically, but she never mastered syntax, never mastered the finer points of language. I mean, she certainly wouldn't be able to participate really in what we're doing now, for example. So, it's anyway, but it's nonetheless, it was an incredible horizon compared to what she would have had otherwise. And this is true for anybody who might have, certain limitations in certain ways or maybe differently abled. It's really important to take these lessons when you work in special education as well. Absolutely, absolutely imperative. What can we take from this as educators? Closing remarks. Helen Keller, I guess I basically said all this already. Yeah, I think that yeah, I'm looking at this. I basically explained that already. Okay. Let us discover as educators, oh, sorry. Yeah, I've also said that. Most of this I've already said, so let me just see if there's anything. I think everything there. But you can see above, there's a picture of Helen Keller. On the far left, far right, top side, you have Anne Sullivan, her teacher, and then down below you have a picture of Jeannie. Now, we have an activity which, when I actually presented this in class in person a few days ago, we were able to do together, but I'll just have to show you here because this is a presentation on the computer. So let's try to imagine that you're sitting in a class with me trying to get through this presentation. And I would basically pass around this Pandora's box. Let me show you what it looks like. Hold on. Sorry, if I'm not sure if you can see. Just a moment. Okay. So here you can see this box, this beautiful box that I made all by myself. You can see it has different words for language in different languages. And inside, or on the side rather, we have a small door which is designed such that you can put your hand through into the darkness of the box within, and you have to sort of feel around. There are 6 different objects, including toys and tools, and just by the power of touch, you're supposed to actually close your eyes. We will try to determine what these objects are. I already know, but just for the purpose of kind of showing you all how this works, I'll pretend that I'm just doing this for the first time. Okay, I feel a cube, like a child's cube. I mean, in the actual activity, you would not pull the toy out, but just to show you. So here, I was right, it's a cube. And now I kind of am feeling around. I feel something that has sort of wheels. It feels like it might have windows. It might be a van of some kind. Ine, we have an ambulance. And very quickly, let's do the rest. I mean, this, I can feel it has sort of a rough surface, kind of like a cube, but not really. It is a stamp. All right, and we're almost done here. I feel something that's kind of yarny. It's like a spool with thread. And here we go. I'm kind of cheating, clearly, but I mean, it was harder, I think, for... Now we're stuck. Okay. All right. And let's see. Now we have something, a long neck. Maybe a giraffe. Anyone? Okay. And then finally, a very long metallic, sort of toothed on the end, a wrench. Oops, excuse. Okay. Well, so as you can see, normally you would not take these objects out of the box, but I did so just to show you what was inside. What does this mean? Well, the reason that I brought this as an interactive activity, the reason I conceived of it or decided to use it rather in the presentation was to show just how language actually works. So I have a bit of an explanation here, and then we'll close our presentation. So no peeking, please. Like I said, just put your hand inside and feel around. And just by using your fingers, your tactile sensations, try to guess what is inside. And I would have had you keep your guesses to yourself. Once everybody has had a chance, tell the class your ideas about what you felt inside the box. But what does this have to do at all with Pirahã and learning English as a second language? It doesn't seem connected at all. But it is. Behold. Try to imagine you had done this yourself. Was it hard feeling around in the dark? Feeling around in the dark? Compare Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan's breakthrough. Helen Keller was very much in the dark. She was blind and deaf. And Anne Sullivan kind of brought the light. So was it hard for us feeling around in the dark, not only trying to lay our hand on some object, any object, in the dark recesses of the box, but then on top of that to put a word, any word, to what you were feeling? How do I name this object? And that is true for the box. But imagine that your own mind is the box. Can I put a word to the thing I'm feeling? Maybe in your native language, but do you always feel like you're even able to put a name or a word to what you are feeling, even in your native language? Not always, frequently not. And so imagine just to what degree that is true for someone who lacks the language that you do on a native level, or someone who has special learning needs. Even more so, might they be feeling around in the darkness of a box, trying to find a word, the right word. I could cry from imagining this. Well, my dear friends, this is what learning a new language is like. In the extreme case of the Pirahã, learning a contact language like Portuguese would be extraordinarily difficult, due not only to the massive structural differences between the two tongues, but because of the anthropological divide in worldview, which the language itself drives, or is driven by, or, more properly, if we are being honest, both. Learning English as a second language for our students in Israel is a great, big Pandora's box activity. That is, that learning English, learning any language as a second language, learning language at all, is feeling around in the darkness of a box, trying to find the right word for the objects that we feel. Whether it be physically with an actual box or mentally with the inner objects of our mind. Our students are feeling around in the dark of their own minds, trying to find the right word for what they are feeling. Any word at all to communicate. Let us be keenly aware of this as fellow teachers. That is our job, to break open that Pandora's box as best we can, shedding the light of words and language and learning into our students' closed off worlds. Not to say that it's entirely closed off, of course. I mean, that's not very nice. But it means worlds that are more closed off than they might be. That they may be pretty open, but we can open them even more. That's the idea. It is not only to teach that a teacher must do, but to communicate to our students that there is a whole world waiting for them outside the Pandora's box, if only we will break it open and show them. It's kind of unclear here, who's the Pandora, what's the box, Pandora's box, according to the myth, you have sort of untold things, perhaps good, perhaps horrible, within the box itself. Who is the Pandora? What are these mysterious things waiting to be released from the box? I will tell you. It is actually the students themselves. The students are the Pandoras. So now go. Unleash the Pandoras of your pupils on the world. Thank you very much.